you know, when a bridge collapses, we usually send in, like, structural engineers.
Right, yeah.
And they point to a fractured stress beam and say, there it is, that's why it fell.
Yeah.
It's a very clean, comforting equation. But today, we're stepping away from engineering and into the crisis of male suicide, where that clean equation just completely vanishes.
It really does, because human psychology doesn't exactly leave behind a twisted piece of metal you can just point to, you know?
Exactly.
We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly complex, and frankly, it's often hidden in plain sight.
And that is exactly what we are wading into right now. We are taking a deep dive into a profoundly important 2022 sociological study by Cleary, which was published in Frontiers in Sociology.
Yes, a really groundbreaking piece of literature.
It really is. And our mission today, for you listening, is to unpack the invisible societal scripts that drive men to breaking points. We're looking at the undeniable link between emotional constraint, the father-son relationship, and male suicide.
Right. And to give you the exact parameters of the data we're working with here, this isn't just some multiple choice survey.
Okay.
It's actually based on in-depth, unstructured interviews with 52 men. They are aged between 18 and 30, primarily from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in Dublin, Ireland.
Wow.
Yeah, and the really unifying factor here is that every single one of these men had recently made a clinically serious or near-fatal suicide attempt.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because what makes this text so revolutionary to me is that it isn't just a grim statistical report, you know.
Right,
It's
exactly.
this incredibly illuminating look into the social construction of masculinity. It challenges the fundamental idea that men are somehow naturally, I don't know, emotionless.
Completely. And to really do this justice, I've actually adjusted the backdrop here in the studio to a subtly lit, book-lined study.
Oh, I like it. Very fitting.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the material we're looking at, it really requires a serious reflective space. We aren't just looking at what happened to these men in the moments before their attempts. We are looking at the foundational environment that built them from childhood. The study defines this foundational blueprint as hegemonic masculinity.
Wait, let me just play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure, go ahead.
If you're listening to this, you might be thinking, hold on. Boys being stoic, boys being aggressive, hiding their tears. Isn't a lot of that just biology? Like just testosterone?
That's a very common pushback, yeah.
Right. So how does Cleary's study prove that this behavior is actually a taught societal script and not just nature?
That is the perfect question, and it's exactly what the data addresses. Hegemonic masculinity is basically the dominant, socially constructed script for how to be a man.
Okay.
It emphasizes physical strength, absolute emotional stoicism, and the complete avoidance of vulnerability.
Like zero vulnerability allowed.
Exactly, zero. And the interviews reveal that these rules aren't innate at all. They are meticulously taught and fiercely enforced, starting right within the family unit. Yeah, the men in the study vividly remembered the exact moments they were basically trained to shut their emotions off.
Did the study give any specific examples of what that training actually looks like in a real home?
It did, yeah. There is a deeply illustrative account from a participant named Nicholas.
Okay, what happened with Nicholas?
So he recounted a time when he was just 8 years old. He was moderately upset about something, as 8-year-olds get.
Right, over a toy or something.
Exactly. And his mother and her friend were comforting him. Nicholas actually referred to it as being mollycoddled.
Oh, interesting word choice.
Right? So right in the middle of this comforting, his father walked into the room.
Oof. I'm guessing the father didn't exactly join in on the comforting.
Quite the opposite. The father gave him this look of severe disgust.
Severe disgust at an 8-year-old.
Yes. It was a look of absolute palpable embarrassment that his son was allowing himself to be comforted by women. At 8 years old, Nicholas instantly internalized the message, which was basically that expressing pain is a systemic failure.
That is heartbreaking. And if you're listening to this, you might think, well, surely the mother steps in. Surely the mother balances that out.
You'd hope so.
Yeah. But from what I read in the study, that dynamic creates a really rigid division of emotional labor in the house, doesn't it?
It completely bifurcates the household. The emotional work,
Yeah.
the nurturing, the listening, the comforting, it was outsourced exclusively to mothers.
Wow.
Between the males in the family, whether it was fathers, sons, or brothers, uncomfortable topics were completely avoided.
Just never talked about.
Never. And if a vulnerable topic did somehow arise, it was instantly deflected through teasing, or what the men in the study referred to as slagging.
Right. So humor just becomes this defense mechanism against intimacy.
Precisely. Take another participant, Alex. Alex was genuinely upset because his brothers were constantly teasing him, really laying into him.
Okay.
So he went to his father for support, trying to express this emotional pain and ask for intervention.
And what did the dad do?
His father's response was to tell Alex to stop whinging. He literally told him that this is just what brothers do.
It's a complete dismissal of the emotional reality. It's like these boys are being programmed with a corrupted operating system.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, where the only valid output for any error message is anger. It's like they're fitted for a psychological straitjacket at birth.
Yes.
They're taught that feeling anything else or expressing a need for comfort from another man is a fundamental failure of their gender.
What's fascinating here is that Cleary's interviews show these men often didn't actually agree with these rules internally.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't want to be stoic all the time. In private, they actively contested these ideas. They deeply desired connection and support.
Wow.
But they felt they had to perform this rigid masculinity publicly just to survive the intense pressure of their own family dynamics. The outward performance of toughness was literally a survival mechanism.
So if the family home is where they get programmed with this corrupted software or put in this straitjacket, what happens when they take that programming out the front door?
It gets worse.
Like, do peers offer any kind of release valve? Or does the neighborhood just make it more intense?
It gets ruthlessly worse. If the home writes the code, the neighborhood and the schoolyard are the firewalls that punish any deviation.
Jeez.
Once these boys stepped outside, the policing of their behavior became incredibly severe. Being different in any way, being quiet, wearing glasses, or displaying anything perceived as feminine traits, it instantly made a boy a target for victimization.
There's a quote from one of the participants, George, that really hit me. He talked about the immense pressure not to be gay, noting that in his environment, gay and feminine is the same.
Exactly.
It wasn't just about sexuality, it was about any display of softness. Being different didn't just mean you were unique, it meant you were actively hunted by your peers.
And that punishment wasn't just verbal teasing either. We have to remember the socioeconomic context of the study here.
Right, mostly lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yeah, many of these men grew up in tough neighborhoods. Another participant, Liam, he grew up in a very rough area surrounded by drugs.
Yep.
His reality was that showing any sign of weakness meant people would turn it against you. You couldn't confide in a friend because that vulnerability literally became a weapon they could use to elevate their own status in a really harsh environment.
We constantly hear the phrase, boys will be boys, as a cultural excuse for schoolyard bullying.
All the time.
But looking at the mechanics of this study, isn't this showing us that bullying is actually a highly organized enforcement mechanism for a toxic culture?
That is exactly what sociological analysis reveals. It is peer-to-peer surveillance. The boys are actively policing each other to ensure no one deviates from the hegemonic script.
Wow.
And I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, think about your own school days. What stands out to you about who was targeted in the hallways and why?
That's a great question.
Chances are, if you really look back, the targets were almost always the boys who stepped outside the accepted boundaries of traditional masculinity.
Right. The boy who cried, the boy who was gentle, they were made examples of.
Exactly.
So when the outside world is this hostile, when school is a minefield, and the neighborhood is looking for any sign of weakness, a child's natural instinct should be to run home to their parents for a safety net.
Ideally, yes. The home should be the sanctuary.
But this brings us to what I think is the most devastating paradox in the entire study. What happens when the primary enforcer of this stoicism, the person holding you to this impossible punishing standard, is your own father?
This is the core finding of Cleary's research, and it's profound, the lasting and deeply damaging impact of negative father-son relationships.
Yeah.
The study identified that the vast majority of these men experienced paternal dynamics that were either deeply distant, explicitly rejecting, or violently abusive.
Can we look closely at how that actually plays out?
Yeah.
Because reading about distant fathers as a sociological term is one thing, but the reality of it is staggering.
It really is. Let's look at Larry. Larry's father was the epitome of the distant patriarch.
Okay.
He showed absolutely zero emotional interest in Laurie for 18 years. He never talked about feelings, never asked for his opinion, never checked in on his well-being.
Just a ghost in the house?
Basically, yeah. Then, suddenly, Larry comes home at 2 o'clock in the morning one night, and his dad is sitting at the kitchen table. He puts a check on the table and demands that Larry go to university.
After 18 years of silence.
Yes.
And Larry refused. Right.
He refused entirely.
And it makes perfect sense why.
Yeah.
He refused out of pure resentment.
Yeah.
She basically looked at his father and said, "You haven't cared for 18 years. You don't get to buy your way into my life now."
Right.
It's such a profound failure of connection. And that's just the distant end of the spectrum. The study also covers homes where the fathers were actively violent, usually tied to alcoholism.
Yes, sadly. Nearly a third of the men in this study grew up in homes where physical violence was a consistent feature.
A third. Wow.
Yeah. But what the study highlights is how this violence warps a child's understanding of love and safety.
That brings up Kieran. I have to be honest. Kieran's story absolutely stopped me in my tracks.
It's very tough to read.
It is the darkest, most tragic embodiment of this entire dynamic.
It is incredibly difficult to process. Kieran grew up with a father who was so emotionally distant, so completely inadequate at providing any warmth or safety, that Kieran actively sought out an alternative.
And the alternative was, he preferred to spend his time staying with a relative who was actively sexually abusing him.
Yes.
Let that sink in. He actually protected his abuser. He refused to confirm the abuse to the authorities. Why? Because in Kieran's warped reality, the abuser actually showed up to watch him play football.
It highlights the absolute blinding desperation for paternal connection.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
The abuser provided some twisted semblance of care and attention that his actual father completely withheld.
Right.
It's like these sons are dying of thirst in a desert, and their fathers are holding a glass of water, but the fathers don't even know how to hand it to them.
That's a powerful analogy.
They literally don't share a vocabulary for affection, so the sons will accept anything that even sounds like a conversation. But my big question here is, why did these men, as adults, constantly try to salvage relationships with these fathers after so much pain?
This raises an essential point about the intergenerational transmission of trauma. Sociologically, we have to recognize that the fathers weren't just stubbornly withholding the vocabulary of love.
They didn't have it.
They literally did not possess it. These fathers were raised in the exact same hegemonic environment. They were the victims of the same peer policing, the same emotional division of labor in their own childhoods.
So even if they wanted to connect, the toolbox was just empty.
Exactly. We see this clearly with another participant, David. David's father was a violent alcoholic during his childhood. Eventually, the father manages to get sober, which society tells us should fix the family dynamic.
Right, everyone thinks, oh, he quit drinking happily ever after.
Exactly.
But it doesn't fix the underlying emotional void.
Not at all. Even sober, the massive emotional gap remained. David noted that he still couldn't talk to his dad about anything real.
Wow.
He felt intensely awkward just being around him. The alcohol was removed, but the emotional tools simply weren't there to replace it. The father didn't suddenly know how to ask, "How are you feeling?" just because he stopped drinking.
So we have these boys growing into men. They're carrying a lifetime of unexpressed trauma, normalized abuse, and profound emotional neglect in a language no one around them speaks. Where does all that pressure go?
Well, because they couldn't confide in their fathers and they couldn't confide in their male friends due to the risk of being marginalized or attacked, they internalized everything.
Just bottled it up.
Completely, and the study points out an incredibly important distinction here. Contrary to a lot of cultural stereotypes about angry young men, these participants largely did not turn their distress outward into violence against others. They pushed it deeply down into themselves.
But you can only push it down for so long before the pressure cooker explodes. Where did they look for a release valve?
They sought emotional solace almost exclusively in intimate romantic partnerships.
Okay.
For these men, women, specifically girlfriends or wives, became their absolute only emotional outlet.
If you're listening, you might think, okay, great. They found a partner. They found a safe space, problem solved.
Right.
But the tragedy is, look at what they are bringing into those relationships. They are bringing massive, unaddressed psychological liabilities.
Precisely. They hadn't been taught how to process emotions. They had only been taught how to suppress them and then basically dump them.
Look at Larry again, the guy who refused the university check. He eventually gets married. But because he has absolutely no emotional roadmap from his own father, he ends up mirroring him.
It's cyclical.
Yeah, he becomes emotionally distant from his own wife and children. He doesn't know how to engage, so he starts drinking heavily to cope with the silence.
The trauma replicates itself, and this is the critical juncture of the entire study. When these romantic relationships inevitably fracture under the immense unfair weight of this unaddressed pain, the men lose their only emotional lifeline.
And that relational collapse is the trigger.
Yes, the text is definitive on this point. The loss of the romantic partner was the primary precipitating event for the suicide attempts across the board.
Across the board.
Yes, it wasn't just the sadness of a breakup, it was the catastrophic loss of the only safe space they had ever found to exist outside of that hegemonic programming.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. We are constantly told by society that men are unemotional, that they don't have the capacity for deep feeling, that they're just naturally aloof.
Right, the classic stereotype.
But Cleary's interviews prove the exact opposite. These men sat down with a researcher, a total stranger, and spoke for hours.
Hours and hours, yeah.
They displayed a massive, intricate capacity to articulate deep, complex, nuanced emotional pain.
They possessed the internal vocabulary. They fully understood their own suffering.
Yes, they had the words perfectly formed in their heads. They just fundamentally lacked a safe space in society to use them before hitting absolute rock bottom.
If you connect this to the broader sociological picture, this completely refutes the biological binary that society clings to.
Right, the convenient myth that women are naturally emotional and men are naturally not.
Exactly. The emotions are entirely present in these men. The societal permission to expunge them is what's missing.
So what does this all mean for us? We've traced this incredibly dark journey. We started with the childhood programming of hegemonic masculinity in the home.
Right.
We saw it ruthlessly enforced by peers in the schoolyard. We saw it entrenched by emotionally distant or abusive fathers who didn't know any better themselves. And finally, we saw the breaking point in adulthood, when their single, fragile, emotional lifeline, a romantic partner, fades away.
Understanding this specific mechanism is crucial for all of us, no matter who you are or what your background is.
Why is that?
Because it reveals precisely why so many current suicide prevention programs are failing these men.
How so? Like, what are they getting wrong?
If a public health campaign relies on singular, binary ideas about men's emotions, if it assumes men just need to be told to speak, it misses the sociological reality entirely.
Because they already know how.
Exactly. They know how to speak. They are terrified of the social consequences of doing so because their entire lives have taught them that speaking leads to punishment, isolation, or disgust.
That leaves me with a final thought I really want to put out there for everyone listening.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much time putting up billboards and running social media campaigns telling men in crisis to reach out and talk to someone.
Yeah, we see it everywhere.
But if the root of the problem isn't a lack of desire to talk, but rather a generational, systemic inability to communicate safely, what if our public health campaigns stopped focusing just on the men who are already standing on the ledge?
A shift from crisis intervention to foundational prevention.
Exactly. What if we shifted the focus to teaching fathers how to simply ask their young sons how they feel without deflecting with a joke or giving a look of severe disgust?
Wow, yeah.
What if the cure for the male suicide epidemic doesn't start in a psychiatric ward, but actually starts in a parenting class?
That is a profound reframing of the entire issue, and it gets right to the root of the sociology.
It really makes you rethink the whole structure. When a bridge collapses, we don't just stare at the rubble and wonder why gravity works.
Right.
We go back to the blueprint. We change the way the next one is built from the ground up. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this deeply important research. We hope it gives you a new lens to look at the world and the people in it.
Thank you for listening.